tell me a little bit about your story, what happened, about how losing a child tests your faith.
Well, Brenda and I, my wife and I, have 3 children. Megan, who's the oldest one, and then Kristen and Eric. And Kristen graduated from my UPUI with a degree in business 2 years ago in May. And the following month, her right foot swelled up. And to make a long story short, we spent the next year fighting advanced cervical cancer with Kristen. And she passed away June 1st, June 1st, a year ago.
Wow, so that's still raw. We're barely past a 1-year anniversary of that.
Yes, that's correct.
Other things, tell us a little bit about, you wrote a book through this process. Let's
Correct.
spend a little time talking about that, the therapy of that, and the contents of it, and some of those things.
Well, when Kristen was alive, she had a little friend, a 5-year-old friend named Jacob, who was the son of her best friend, Jeff. And when she passed away, I thought Jacob, when he gets old enough, is not going to really remember a lot about Kristen. So I thought, well, I'd write something about her, put something in a 3-ring binder with some photographs of her, so he'll know how courageous she was in this fight, how she never lost her faith, how she kept her sense of humor right up to the very end. And the binder was put together. I had a friend of mine who's an author happen to look at it and read it. He says, you ought to make this into a book because you got a powerful story of faith and mission to help protect other women from the same illness. So it grew into a book, and we found in the process of putting the binder together, my son had found 17 journals that Kristen had left behind that she'd written.
My goodness.
It was a surprise to me. I had no idea that she was such a creative and prolific writer. And she had, out of the 17 journals, she had 2 of them that covered the last year of her life during her treatment, and 2 that were poetry. So we incorporated the poetry into the book, and probably 80% of the book is a chronological story of her for the last year that she wrote. Probably 80% of it she wrote.
Wow. That is neat. So,
and it was therapy for me too.
Absolutely. Now, tell us a little bit about that dreaded disease. I mean, you might feel like here for a moment I'm making a public service announcement, but do that.
I understand.
Do that.
Well, part of the mission of now for all of us, and the focus is to help protect other women from having the same experience, because there's 11,000 diagnoses every year in the United States of cervical cancer. 4,000 women will die. And we don't want any more of them to die because of this. There's a vaccine available for it. There's now an HPV test that's available for it. So with all the medical technology breakthroughs, there is a way to protect women, and we're hoping that that will become the mission of not only her book, but her foundation that we're in the process of putting together right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
But it is an HPV-based, there's 2 different versions of the virus that will cause cervical cancer. And now there's a vaccine to protect women.
I heard about that yesterday. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and so, I mean, is the vaccine, I know you're educating me a little bit here on the air, but is the vaccine, is it a 100% kind of thing, or? They
figure that the women who are vaccinated, it will prevent at least 70 to 80% of all the cervical cancers, all of them. That most of them are HPV-based, virus-based. The vaccine's available for women 9 to 26 years old in the United States. In the European Union, it's being given to women of all ages.
Okay.
Wow.
And they're also now considering giving it to the men because they carry the virus.
Sure.
Women aged 20 to 24, there's a 45% infection rate. So if you look at the college age group of young ladies, almost half of them are already infected with HPV.
Right.
Oh, wow.
And this would be public knowledge for anybody watching doctor that they could contact and
that's and I'm a pilot by trade. I'm not a doctor, so you want to gather the information on your own and make your own informed decision.
Right. Great. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about. I mean, obviously, I would think I would be in despair. You know, sometimes people say, I know how you feel, but I think I have no idea how you feel unless somebody really walks through something. I don't think they know how a person feels. So here you're going through this, you, your wife, family, loved ones. How do you focus on hope in a situation like that?
I always tell everyone that you've got to have that hope someplace. And obviously from our family's perspective, we believe in Christ. We believe in God and His redeeming capability. But when you're challenged with something like this, which is probably the biggest challenge that anyone would ever face, is losing a child, it's so easy to lapse into despair. And I've talked to one lady who lost a husband who said she's lost her faith in the process. you've got to keep focused. It's one day at a time, because it's so overwhelming to be a caregiver for someone who has a terminal illness. We were at the point where we were giving her 13 medications. It took them, I had to put them on a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet to keep them straight during the day on the medications. And it's just overwhelming. I mean, sometimes you just have to take it 1 hour at a time. You pray an awful lot, an awful lot. There were moments when I would get out of bed in the morning when she was in the hospital. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed and saying, God, this has to be a bad dream. Mm-hmm. And then I'd hear God say, no, it's not. Get down to the hospital.
Right.
So, you just do those kind of things almost on a daily basis.
Right.
But and the family of faith rallies around you. Our church family was incredible, not only in the prayer support, but one day on a Sunday when we were down in the hospital, one of the 7 trips to the hospital with Kristen, they took up a special offering for us, brought us $369 to help us offset costs and food and things like that when we were down at St. Vincent's Hospital, and it was wonderful. I mean, it was incredible. And the internet gives you an opportunity to communicate to others that are friends and acquaintances and family and give them updates, which were in the book. But the nice thing was with the response and prayers we got back from those people was unbelievable.
Right.
That was true miracles.
Right. Praise the Lord.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, you mentioned a lady lost a husband that kind of lost her faith. We have a friend who lost a friend and just really almost shipwrecked his faith. What would you say to somebody out there who's saying, wow, Kirk, I lost my friend or daughter or husband and I don't even know, I don't believe in God anymore. Maybe it's not even I don't believe in God. Maybe it's just I'm angry and
That's exactly what I felt when I
Yeah.
talked to this lady. I thought more as an anger reaction than anything else. Well, I looked at her and I said, read the book.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'm not promoting the book, but the story of Kristen's faith and how she hung in there with it and all the wonderful things that happened after she passed away were small miracles, but they were just incredible to watch it happen.
Right.
And when the whole process started with Kristen of fighting this illness, her oncologist looked at it, because I told him I was going to pray for the healing miracle,
Sure.
And he looked at me one day in the hallway and he said, watch for the small miracles too along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And he was right.
Right.
Even though we didn't get the main miracle we were looking
Right.
for, and the loss and the void that she leaves in our lives, we're able to enjoy the small miracles that happen, to be sensitive to those kind of things. Because there were a lot of wonderful things that happened, even after she left.
Right.
And the book's a perfect testimony for that.
Sure.
Amen.
I mean, I'm a reluctant author. That was not my objective to write a book.
Right. Isn't that neat, though, how the Lord does those kind of things
No,
to
it's,
us?
yeah,
where
it's been amazing.
we find ourselves doing or being
Yeah.
or becoming something that was so far afield of what
Yeah,
we thought.
That's very true. Very true.
Any particular funny moments? You talk about her sense of humor. Is there a story or two in your mind that you think of every time you think of her sense
Well,
of humor?
the one that always comes back to me is when one of the trips into the hospital, when they gather up your urine in a tub just to measure it to make sure you can go home at some
Right.
point. It was during Easter, and they'd been dyeing Easter eggs, and Kristen told them to go back and take the blue dye and dump it in this collection pail. And so the nurse came in and was in the back in the restroom trying to think and think and think, figure out what happened to this poor girl because she got this blue dye
That's too
in the
funny.
pail, So that was the funniest moment, I think, along the way.
That is
But
good.
that was Kristen's idea, and she always had some great humor. And she shared some things with me during the process, too, that were just incredible. One time when Brenda, this was her last trip to the hospital before she passed away, and she came out of us. Brenda had left the room, and I was in there alone. She woke up and she looked at me and she goes, Dad, I'm going to heaven. I know that, Kristen, but are you planning on leaving soon?
Uh-huh.
She goes, no. And I thought about it for a minute. I said, Kristen, will you promise me something? She said, what's that? And I said, if you get there before I do, will you stand at the gate and wait for your dad?
Uh-huh.
She goes, sure, Dad. She smiled at me with those big blue eyes and said, I'll wait for you. And she
Yeah.
went right back to sleep.
Huh.
That was one of those special moments that,
Absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely.
Which reminds me of when after Kristen passed away, that afternoon I called my Uncle Don and told Don that she'd passed away. And he said on the phone, he says, Kirk, he says, there's no way in the world you'd ever convince her to come back now.
Right.
Absolutely.
I said, well, I wouldn't want her back in this condition anyways.
Right.
But,
Sure.
we know that she stands at the gate and waits
That's
for
right.
us.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Pastor, for having me here.
God bless you. Amen.